When rescue workers arrive, around 10 minutes after the crash, they discover their conditions are less than enviable. The overrun tunnel is in complete darkness. Soot, dirt and dust kicked up in the crash create a thick dark fog which blackens anything it touches in fine residue. The trains are completely wedged in the tunnel, making maneuvering through the wreck incredibly difficult. This rescue effort is going to be a cramped affair that's going to drag on for hours. What the rescue workers find on board the carriages is hell. Some are dead, some are living, some are stuck in between and suffocating in the mass. Many of the survivors have suffered grisly injuries, rendering them unable to move. Many of them are simply trapped in place by the wreckage or the dead. Under the light of their torches, rescue workers find some of the dead still sitting in place, as if they were almost ready to step out the doors and be on their way to work. The workers make their way to survivors, cutting and hacking their way through metal. But as the hours pass by, conditions only worsen. The London Underground can be a hot place to begin with, but with no trains running, forcing air through the tube lines, it's only getting hotter. Torches and cutting equipment are making matters worse, not only heating the tunnel to a sweltering 49 degrees Celsius, but eating up the oxygen in the air, sending oxygen levels from the usual 21% to just 16%. If you were trapped among the bodies, you'd have it even worse, not to mention the smell from decomposition. One fireman recalled the desperation from those still trapped. In a section of the wreckage too tight for large cutting equipment, Brian Goodfellow uses a hacksaw to cut his way in. As he does so, hands start to grasp at him from the inside. As they pull on him, he drops his torch, plunging the carriage into darkness. Terror-stricken by his predicament, he escapes out of his fire jacket as the hands pull it in with them. He retreats to the platform to recompose himself, then returns to the rescue work. After 6 hours of tireless effort, there are only 2 remaining survivors in the front carriage, pinned down under mangled girders and trapped together. 19-year-old Margaret Lyles is a policewoman, and 27-year-old Jeff Benton works at the London Stock Exchange. Any of Margaret's movements cause Jeff agony, so she tries to keep still. Another 5 hours later, it is concluded that the only way to free the two is by amputating Margaret's left foot. Margaret is put to sleep and operated on by surgeons. Jeff finds himself an involuntary observer. Thankfully, the two are soon free and on their way to hospital. Unfortunately, Jeff Benton will die of his injuries a month later. Like many others, he was suffering from crush syndrome, a state of shock induced by compression of skeletal muscle. Around 13 hours after the crash, rescue workers turn off their equipment and call for silence in the tunnel. They call out for survivors, but there is no response. They conclude that the remaining bodies are lifeless. In all, 43 are dead, and 74 are injured. So, what caused such a tragedy? As I mentioned, there was nothing wrong with the train. The driver, Leslie Newson, was the cause. A simple mistake or accident, you may be thinking, but it's a little bizarre. Newson's body was the last to be recovered. His body still at the controls, the 3-foot driver's cab had been crushed to 6 inches. At the time of the crash, the train's engine was still running. The brakes were not applied. Newson had seemingly not made any attempt to stop the train. The dead man's handle was still depressed, suggesting he was not incapacitated either, as the brakes are automatically applied when a human is not actively operating the handle. Examinations of his body concluded that he was in his normal driving position when he died. He did not raise his arms or cower at the sight of the oncoming wall. Witnesses on the platform confirmed that the driver appeared to be staring straight ahead as if nothing were wrong just before the crash. So, what was he doing? Some suggest Newson was committing suicide and intentionally crashing the train. Earlier that week, the experienced driver had uncharacteristically overshot 2 platforms while stopping. Some think he may have been practicing his suicide in doing this, getting a feel for barreling past his destination. This was deemed unlikely by friends and co-workers. They wouldn't have suspected him as being depressed or suicidal, and even if he was, to include so many people in that suicide with no regard for their lives or safety seems very extreme. Also, Newson had been planning to buy his daughter a car after work that day and was actually carrying the money with him at the time of the crash. A post-mortem revealed Newson's blood alcohol level was above normal. Could he have been intoxicated at the time of the incident? He wasn't described as a heavy drinker, and once again his colleagues didn't notice anything unusual in his behaviour that day. It's possible that the alcohol found in his blood may have simply been a product of decomposition. And even if it wasn't, the level of alcohol found in his blood was very unlikely to lead to the level of impairment required to allow such an accident to occur. No other drugs were found in his system. Was his mind simply absent at the time of the crash? Was he distracted or daydreaming? It was found that the change in environment, noise and lighting as a train comes into the station should be more than sufficient to snap someone back to reality. Surely Newson would have at least noticed when the wall was straight ahead of him and thrown his arms out in front of him in reaction. Well, there are also medical conditions that could explain the crash. Was Newson temporarily paralyzed, seized up, or blacked out? It seems like the most logical explanation, but we'll never know. There was insufficient evidence to support this theory. Officially, the blame for the accident was placed solely on Leslie Newson. However, it was simply ruled an accident. Officials were unable to say for sure why he acted as he did. Since then, some changes have been made to prevent similar accidents. The tunnel wall at the end of Moorgate's Platform 9 was painted white to make it more visible. A speed limit of 10 miles per hour was imposed for all trains entering terminal platforms, and train stop equipment was installed that automatically applies a train's emergency brakes if it attempts to pass above a certain speed. This system was operational all across the underground by 1984. As it stands, that's all there is to the story, and it seems likely there'll forever be a missing piece to the Moorgate puzzle. What's certain is the immense tragedy and unimaginable horror of the crash. Those who worked to rescue victims are beyond commendable. Not only did they subject themselves to intensely physically grueling conditions, but also probably to lasting psychological trauma too. What they experienced in that tunnel is the stuff of nightmares. In some ways you could
Seek them out. Hailing over here. Found one.
Scanning ahead. Found them.
Hawk out.
Come on, come on, come on!
30 seconds left.
When you're live, anything could go wrong.
Cap, a little cork here.
One false move and your entire performance could be replayed to millions of viewers for all the wrong reasons.
Ah!
10
my
seconds
God!
left.
The thought of something going horribly wrong didn't scare away these two creators though, Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith, writers and actors of a current television series called Inside Number 9. These two creators thrive on experimenting with the limitations they create, every episode with a different story, and usually presented in a different way. So it's not surprising that they didn't turn down the challenge when the BBC suggested they make a live episode during the month of Halloween. However, creating a live episode was never going to be that simple for Reece and Steve. Not because they'd have trouble performing live, their whole history in performing began and still continues on stage. The real problem is coming up with a story that can exploit the idea of being live. something that would only work if you tuned in on the very night the episode aired. I think it's safe to say the most obvious answer to this would be to fool the audience into thinking that something went horribly wrong. But how could one pull such an elaborate stunt in an era where all information is leaked to the internet before plotlines and twists are even displayed on screen? If something like this were to succeed, they had to be careful.
Spike planted.
Yeah. How nervous are you about this? It's like we've done anything
One
like this.
down.
It is, yeah. I mean, we always like to push ourselves with stories that we tell with number 9. So it's a scary thing to attempt.
It was a bet. Essentially, the BBC said to us,
Yeah, we
why
didn't
don't
want
you
to
do
do
a live episode? And if someone puts that challenge to you, you think we've got to go for it.
Last player standing.
They announced to the world a live episode of Inside Number 9 to be aired on October 28th, 2018.
One enemy
It
remaining.
would be their Halloween special. They added a synopsis to give out clues as to what the episode was about. When Arthur Flitwick finds an old mobile phone in his local graveyard, he makes the mistake of trying to contact the owner, but some mysteries are best left unsolved. This was spread across several media articles and platforms, all building up to the big moment. But this wasn't the only time Inside Number 9 appeared in the press about its live episode.
Are you believers in ghosts? Are you very much kind of open to believing that there is something out there?
No.
A UK media outlet called The Sun posted an article discussing a rumour about Stephen Rees abandoning Granada Studios due to having paranormal experiences. According to the article, Granada Studios is where Stephen Rees had planned to film the live episode, but apparently both have been experiencing strange activity on set. It's interesting that this rumour came out because it wasn't the only time people have experienced paranormal activity at this particular studio. Going back on its history, Granada Studios was built during the 1950s and was mainly used to film a popular
Last
UK
player
soap
standing.
opera called Coronation Street. Several of the actors and actresses have claimed to have experienced strange activity around this set.
Spike
It's
planted.
happened so many times that a TV ghost hunting show called Most Haunted decided to investigate the studio for one of their episodes. Upon
Attackers
investigating, they discovered that an old Victorian